The following program outlines the Grand Theater perspective of February 1861. February 1861 starts with a boom. On February 1st, in Austin, Texas, the state convention there votes to secede from the Union by a delegate vote of 166 to 7. Texas is now the seventh rebellious state, joining the other slave states now out of the Union. On February 1st, the whole of the Deep South from Texas to South Carolina is now in rebellion. Public property, arsenals, and equipment have been secured by these self-declared independent states. The Texas Convention's wording states, "We, the people of the state of Texas, by delegates and convention assembled, do declare and ordain that the ordinance adopted by our convention of delegates on the 4th day of July, A.D. 1845, and afterwards ratified by us, under which the Republic of Texas was admitted into union with other states, and became a party to the compact styled the Constitution of the United States of America, be and is hereby repealed and annulled." The Texas Convention will submit the convention's vote to the citizens of Texas for a vote on February 23rd, a measure that's distinct among previously seceding states. Also on February 1st, in New Orleans, Louisiana, the United States Mint is seized by rebel militia. It was estimated that the New Orleans Mint had nearly $400,000 at the time of seizure. Additionally, it is believed that over 1,000 cannons have been secured from seized United States forts throughout the South by the beginning of the month. At the onset of February, there are fears that the nation's capital is in grave danger of being seized. Let's zoom into the region of the nation's capital. There are widespread public concern in the North that the nation's capital, situated between Maryland and Virginia, two slave states, will be lost if these states join the secession movement. Baltimore, which is north of Washington, is being named in newspapers as the center of a large plot to seize the capital. In Washington, General Winfield Scott receives more artillery to guard the city. Let's zoom back out. Major Robert Anderson's garrison at Fort Sumter off Charleston Harbor remains isolated and surrounded. Anderson's garrison is nearing 2 months of isolation at Charleston Harbor. In a similar situation is the United States garrison at Fort Pickens just off Pensacola, Florida. Fort Sumter and Fort Pickens sit in a strange limbo, United States forts deep in secession territory. Americans will find rumors and contradictory information about these forts in the newspapers in February. James Buchanan is in his last month as president. Abraham Lincoln will be inaugurated in March. In Washington, there is still a move in Congress to avert a disaster. Senator John Crittenden of Kentucky is working to formulate enough support from congressmen north and south to reach a compromise. Any such compromise effort will require concessions to the slave states to keep the Upper South in the Union. February 2nd, in Washington, abolitionist Senator Charles Sumner asked President Buchanan what more Massachusetts could do for the nation. President Buchanan told Sumner to adopt the resolutions offered by Senator Crittenden. These compromises include resolutions that would yield to the interests of the slave states. Charles Sumner told the president, "The public sentiment of Massachusetts makes that impossible, and I agree with that sentiment." On February 4th, 2 conferences are now in session, one in Washington and one in Montgomery, Alabama. In Washington, delegates from 21 states assemble for a peace conference. It is headed by former President John Tyler of Virginia. Meanwhile, in Montgomery, Alabama, representatives from the secession states meet to form the new Southern government. By February 7th, Alabama's legislature loans $500,000 to bankroll the new government. On the same day, the representatives in Montgomery form a constitution. The Constitution is essentially identical to the United States Constitution, with the important addition of a provision to make slavery a perpetual right. Also on February 7th, in St. Louis, Missouri, there is a large pro-union gathering. This critical Mississippi River town in Middle America shows public signs of loyalty to the United States. The city's large arsenal is well defended with some 500 troops. February 8th. In Montgomery, the convention delegates adopt the Confederate Constitution, and the new government is officially called the Confederate States of America. On the same day, at Little Rock, Arkansas, rebel militia secure the United States arsenal there. Secession action is spreading up from the Deep South. The next day, February 9th, in Montgomery, Jefferson Davis is named Provisional President of the new Confederate States of America, with Alexander Stephens as Vice President. So in 3 days in February 1861, the Southern delegates at the Montgomery Convention devised a constitution, adopted that constitution, named their new country, and selected a president. February 11. Up north in Springfield, Illinois, Abraham Lincoln leaves for Washington. In an eerie foreshadow, he tells a crowd there that, "I now leave, not knowing when or whether ever I may return." Mr. Lincoln had also recently told his law partner William Herndon, quote, "If I live, I am coming back sometime, and then we're going to go right on practicing law as if nothing happened." Even before leaving Springfield, Abraham Lincoln understands the gladiatorial arena he has entered. Lincoln's inaugural train route will follow from Springfield to Indianapolis, then on east to Ohio and up to New York State before bounding southward for Washington. On February 11th, Lincoln's train leaves Springfield and arrives in Indianapolis. On February 12th, the Chicago Tribune included a piece from the Illinois Journal which defended Lincoln's commitment to the Republican cause. However, it too included a foreboding sentence reading, "In less than 1 month, Abraham Lincoln, if he lives, will be inaugurated President of the United States." February 13th. Newspapers are reporting that Major Anderson at Fort Sumter, contrary to rumors, has not received reinforcements. Questions swirl as to whether the garrison can remain there in place if unreachable and unprovisioned. Major Anderson, being surrounded by rebel forces, is in reality receiving food provisions from a private meat supplier. Also on February 13th, an editorial in the paper The Spirit of Democracy from Woodsfield, Ohio, noted that despite the crisis, trade is brisk, the banks are liberal, and money tolerably plentiful. There will be any quantity of talk, but probably no fighting. In Washington, surveys of congressmen from northern states show that most prefer amicable compromise to conflict. The Upper South, states like Virginia and Tennessee, seem to be holding to a wait-and-see attitude on secession. However, while the Cotton South has already left the Union, some northern states are also uninterested in compromise. The Minnesota legislature declares that it will not send delegates to the peace convention in Washington, as Minnesota will not yield to a compromise extending protections on slavery. February 14. In Montgomery, the Confederate Congress reviews 6 models for a Confederate flag. On February 15th, Abraham Lincoln's train is in Cleveland, Ohio. February 17th, Jefferson Davis is in Montgomery, a city filled with great celebration. He stays at the Exchange Hotel. The next day, February 18th, in Montgomery, Jefferson Davis is inaugurated President of the Confederacy at the city's Capitol Hill. The tune Dixie is played at the ceremony. On the same day, Abraham Lincoln is in Albany, New York. Meanwhile, newspapers at this time are reporting that the United States capital, Washington, is looking more and more like an army encampment in preparation for the inauguration. February 21. Abraham Lincoln is in Philadelphia. Lincoln is informed by Detective Alan Pinkerton of a plot to assassinate him in Baltimore. Later that night, Lincoln receives a second warning that police in Washington discovered an assassination plot. Also on February 21st, in Yorkville, South Carolina, the Inquirer records what may be, if not one of the first casualties of the Civil War, one of the earliest casualties in the conflict. A South Carolina militiaman named Jason C. Allen, stationed near Fort Moultrie at Charleston, was killed in an accident. February 22nd, Lincoln leaves Philadelphia for Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to continue his public schedule. In Harrisburg, however, Lincoln will break with his public schedule in the evening. After the day's ceremonies, he changes the timing of his departure. His train routes from Harrisburg to Philadelphia and then toward the capital, passing through Baltimore in the middle of the night on a secret car. The President-elect of the United States arrives in Washington in the wee hours of the night. When the sun rises the next morning, February 23rd, Lincoln surprises many, already being in Washington earlier than his public schedule indicated. Lincoln has a cordial meeting with President Buchanan. He also meets with former President Tyler and the officers of the Peace Commission. On the same day as Lincoln's reception in Washington, Texas citizens ratify secession, approving the actions of its delegates earlier that month. Texas is unique among the secession states in that the vote by the delegates was turned back to a public vote. On February 24th, Lincoln has this photograph taken. The photographer is Alexander Gardner of Matthew Brady's gallery. February 27th, in Washington, the Peace Conference concludes with a recommendation to Congress, an amendment that forbids Congress from banning slavery. By the end of the month, the details of plots against Lincoln become public. The plot included an attempt to throw Lincoln's train from the track down a cliffside on its way to Baltimore. A second plot was more direct. An assassin's pistol would kill him when he arrived at one of the stations in Baltimore. By the end of February 1861, Abraham Lincoln is now in Washington. 7 states are in secession. The North is divided if it should compromise to keep the Upper South in the Union or if it should stand firm against any extension of slavery. The future of the country is in serious jeopardy.